Hey guys, BrandonioProductions here, and welcome to yet another Visual Basic .NET tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to be using Microsoft Visual Studio 2010 Professional Edition, or Ultimate Edition, or I don't know what edition it is. And I've also created a project using the .NET 2.0 framework, or .NET Framework 2.0, .NET Framework version 2.0. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started right with the tutorial. So in this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about a very popular topic, how to actually make your program turn on or start when your computer actually turns itself on. So essentially, I'm going to be teaching you how to make your program start with Windows. Now this is a popularly requested topic because people often want to create malicious software that automatically starts when their computer starts. They also want to create timer applications are very popular. So you can time how long your computer's been running, but a lot of other things where you just want it to run when your computer actually starts up. So in this tutorial, I will explain the theory behind and the process of making your application start with Windows. So let's go ahead and start with the theory. Now there are two main ways to make your application actually start with Windows. The first main way is inserting a key into the registry. Now this key actually points to your executable, and then when the computer starts up, it will read this registry value and run that executable that the key is linked to. The second way is a lot easier, actually. Since the first way is messing with the registry, it's difficult to remove for an unexperienced user. So if they go ahead and uninstall your software, it may or may not just delete the registry key associated with that. And then you get kind of unused registry keys, which are kind of bad. They kind of like clunk up your system a little bit. It's just kind of like throwing garbage in the corner of your room in order to clean it. It just doesn't really work. So I'm going to hopefully provide you with a cleaner solution and an easier to understand one as well. So instead of creating an actual register key, we're going to create a shortcut that actually leads to the main executable of our program. And then we're going to go ahead and throw that shortcut in our startup folder. Now every Windows application actually has a startup folder, and you can access this by clicking on the Start menu, All Programs, and then going to the startup folder itself. I'm going to right click and explore this folder. So as you can see, when my computer starts up, it automatically runs Dropbox and Rainmeter. Everything else that starts up is actually loaded as a registry value. However, these two pieces of software decided to do it folder-wise. But that's okay. So we're going to be joining Dropbox and Rainmeter, and we're going to be making software that just pops a shortcut right into the startup folder in order to start our application with Windows. So now that we know how we're going to do this, let's go ahead and jump right in. So programmatically, we're just going to be needing to create a shortcut that links to our executable and popping it into the startup folder. So I've already created this form in VB.NET. I call it the Start with Windows form, or Startup Test, and I've actually already saved the project and labeled buttons. But so the program's main purpose is we're going to be able to start with Windows, or put the shortcut in the startup folder, or undo our Start with Windows option by deleting the shortcut from the folder. So let's go ahead and begin by coding the Start with Windows option. Now the first thing we need to do before actually coding anything is we need to import a reference, or add a reference. So in order to do this, we're going to press Project and then Add Reference. Now the reference we're going to be using is actually a COM reference, which is a little bit unusual, but this is because this is where the actual file communication network is. So the file communication network, or file communication library, is the Windows Script Host Object module. So this will allow us to create a script, or use a script that will actually create a shortcut. So let's go ahead and add this reference. And now that the reference is added, we're just going to go ahead and import it. So I'm going to go to the top of our form's code here and say imports WSH runtime library. And now that that's imported, we will never have to type this again. So let's go ahead and start with our code. The first thing we need to do is we actually need to gather a few variables, because we're going to need a couple of bits of information to actually create this code. So we're going to create some path variables. Now the first path we need to actually get is the path of the startup folder itself. So as you can see, startup folders have a semi-complicated path name. First of all, it involves my name And it also depends on what installation of Windows you are using. So Windows 7, for example, is going to have a different startup folder path than a Windows XP user. And on top of that, different usernames lead to different paths. So in order to create or get the correct path, we need to let VB.net actually decipher this information. Otherwise, we would be guessing people's names in Windows installations. And this can be done very easily. So we're just going to go ahead and create a string. So dim executable, or actually, this isn't executable. This is startup, getting ahead of myself here, path as string. And we're going to let VB.net get the folder path. So getting any folder's path can be done using the environment. So we can say environment.getFolderPath. And then we simply need to send in a folder. Now, the startup folder, since it differs upon Windows installations and username, is actually what VB.net calls a special folder. Now, as you can see here, we have a small list of special folders, all of which involve the user's username and Windows installation dependence. So we're just going to go ahead and get the startup folder. So we're going to say environment.specialfolder.startup. And then we just close our parentheses, and that's one of the variables we need. Now we also need to actually get the path of where our executable is, so we can tell our shortcut to actually go to that path. So we're now going to say dim executable path as string. So the way we're going to do this is we're actually going to get the process of our application that's currently running and just ask the process, hey, where's the application? And then it will tell us. So how are we going to do this? By using system diagnostics. So we're going to say system.diagnostics.process.getCurrentProcess. Now this is the code that actually gets the process that our application is running on. And then we're going to get the main module's name. So main module.filename. So that's going to return the path of our executable. So now we're also going to create a final one, which is going to get the name of our executable. Now this actually allows us to name our shortcut. So we're going to say dim executable name as string equal to system.diagnostics.getCurrentProcess.mainModule .module name. So now that we have our three variables that will allow us to create the shortcut and put it in a specific spot, let's actually start creating the shortcut. So we are going to need two things to actually create the shortcut. We're going to need a shell to actually execute our options, and a link that will actually serve as our shortcut itself. So we're going to create a shell, so dim shell as WSH shell. Now, as you notice, the WSH is very familiar to the WSH we've imported. So if we didn't import that, we'd actually have to type iwsh runtime library.wsh shell. But since we imported it, we can just skip directly to the WSH shell. And then we also need to dim a link. And the link is going to be a WSH shortcut, because the link is going to serve as our actual shortcut. Now VB.net is actually already telling us, hey, you need to do something with those variables, which is actually pretty nice. So the next thing we need to do is actually create the shortcut and save it. Now there are a few errors that can occur when creating a shortcut. The file that you're shortcutting to may not exist, or the place you're saving it to may not exist, but either way, we need to catch these errors. So we're actually going to put this in a try block. And inside of our try block, or actually inside of our catch here, so if an error does occur, we're simply going to display a message box with the message of the error that occurred. Keep it nice and simple. So now that we've done that, we can go ahead and actually create the shortcut. So the first thing we need to do is make the shell a new instance of a shell. So we're going to say shell equals new WSH shell. And once it's a new instance, we can actually start doing stuff with it. So we're going to use the shell to actually create the shortcut or the link. So now we're going to say link equals shell.createShortcut. See how easy that was? We just tell it to create a shortcut. And then we actually want to send in the path where we are actually going to save the shortcut. So we just need to say, well, for example, we just saved that. So this is going to be in the startup path. And then we actually need to tell it our executable's name. So we're going to use the ampersand here in order to give a what is this? A backslash that will actually allow us to pop in our application's name. And then we're going to send in executable name. And then finally, we need to add the extension .lnk. And if you didn't know, all shortcuts have a .lnk extension, which simply means it's a link to an executable. So if we go ahead and leave it like this, it looks like it'll work. However, during runtime, this is actually going to throw us an error, because this is not actually, as you can see, create shortcut returns an object. And instead of an object, we want it to be a WSH shortcut. So we're actually going to have to convert this, or cast it. And this can be done using VB's C-type. So we are actually going to cast this shell.createShortcut, this shortcut object, and we're going to cache it as a IWSH shortcut. So now that it's casted into this interface, we can use it as a shortcut, and we are all set. So the next thing we need to do with our shortcut, now that we have created it, and we have actually told the path where it is going to be located, we need to tell it which path it's going to actually open. So we can simply say link.targetPath equals executable path. So it now knows that when you double-click the shortcut, it's going to open the file located at executable path. And that's actually the variable that we declared up there, which is where our application is located. And finally, we just need to save the shortcut. So we're going to say link.save. So this is actually the complete code for creating a shortcut. So we can actually test this by running our application. And we're just going to press the Start with Windows button. Now no errors occurred, which is always a good thing. We're just going to go ahead and reopen our startup folder here. And as you can see here, we actually have a shortcut that we created that's links to startuptest.vshost.exe. Now the reason it has vshost on the end of it is because we're running it in the debugger. So if we actually ran the executable instead of running it in the debugger, it will not have that vshost extension. So now that our thing is actually, or our shortcut is actually created in the startup folder, we need a way to actually remove this. So if users want to opt out of the Start with Windows, they can go ahead and opt out. So we can actually go ahead and delete this shortcut. Now deleting the shortcut is actually a lot easier than you may think. Instead of using any sort of shortcut, any sort of script host interface, we can actually just go ahead and use the basic file system. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Let me actually close out of our application here. And let's go ahead and get started. So I'm just going to go ahead and double click back to our form, and then double click on our Don't Start with Windows button, and go ahead and start coding this. So we're also going to need a little bit of information in order to delete the shortcut. The first thing we're going to need is where the startup folder is located, so we know where to delete the shortcut from. And we're also going to need to know the name of the executable, so we need to know exactly what shortcut to delete. So we're going to go ahead and dim startup path as string. And once again, we're going to get the startup folder. So environment .get folder path, and this is going to be a special folder. So environment.specialfolder.startup. Now the next thing we need is actually the executable's name. So we're going to say dim executable name as string equal to system.diagnostics.process.get current process .main module, .module name. Okay, so now that we have the executable name and the startup path, it's very simple. All we need to do is go ahead and scan the startup path, find any file that has executable name in it, and go ahead and delete it. Now, the main reason that we want to actually scan the startup folder instead of simply deleting the file is if you actually upgrade or change the name of your application to include maybe a number or something, when you actually want to remove the folder or the item from startup, you also want to remove any ones that didn't have the number on it. So this is kind of just like a self-protection issue. If you're updating your application, you don't want to forget about previous versions sitting there that are going to open themselves, but they don't really exist. So we're just going to go ahead and take care of that by deleting all instances in the startup folder that relate to our object. So we're going to go ahead and start our scanning process. Now in order to do that, we're going to need to get information about the startup path directory and the files within the startup pack directory. So in order to do that, we need to create a directory info object. So we're going to say dim directory info as new system.io.directory_info. Now this object is just going to be able to give us information about a directory. So we need to send in the directory that we need information about, but we've already created that variable, startup path. And now that we have our directory info variable, we can actually start getting information about our files. So I'm going to actually create an array which will allow us to store all file information in this directory. So we're going to say dim file info, and we're just going to create this as an array by opening and closing our parentheses as system.io.fileinfo. So I'm essentially creating a limitless array of file infos. And then I'm just going to say file info equals directory info.get files. Now what we're going to do is instead of telling it to get all files, we're going to get all of the files with the .lnk extension. So to do that, we send in a string with the asterisks, and this is actually a wildcard. So this means the shortcut can be named anything, but as long as it's a shortcut, we're good. So let's go ahead and scan the files within the actual directory. So we're going to say for each file as system.io.fileinfo in fileinfo, we're going to go ahead and do something. So essentially what we're doing is we're scanning through the file info array, and we're finding each object, and then we're just naming each object file and telling VB.net that each object is a file info. So the thing we need to do next is see if the object's name matches our executable name. So we're going to say if file.fullname.contains, and then we actually executable name is what we named it. So if it contains our executable name, then, well, we need to delete the file. So we could simply say file.delete. So all we've done here is we've set our path variables, and then we're scanning the startup directory for all shortcuts, and then if the shortcut contains our executable name, which means if it contains any part of it. So since ours is startup test, if we run this code, it will also delete any files called startup test 2, startup test new, startup test redux, anything that is like tagged onto that. Now this could of course be complicated if you have two programs that are actually related on your computer, so in order to do that, instead of doing the .contains, you're simply going to want to say .equals, and this will only delete the file that you want it to. But I'm going to stick with .contains because I really enjoy having that extra security. So let's go ahead and run our application once again, just to test this out. So we've got our little form here, and let's go ahead and open the startup folder and pop this here. So as you can see, we've got our shortcut still, so let's go ahead and try to undo the shortcut. So if we press the Don't Start with Windows button, we can actually see that our shortcut is deleted. So this means when Windows starts up, it will scan the startup folder, and it will not see our shortcut. However, if we press the Start with Windows button, it creates our shortcut, so Windows will start up, it will scan Dropbox, it will scan Rainmeter, and then it will start up Startup Test. Now, it would show you this in video demonstration, but that would require me to restart my computer, which would in turn shut off my screencaster, which would in turn not allow me to record. So it doesn't really work like that. Anyway, so this is the tutorial on how to actually make your application start with Windows. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I know I've had several requests about this tutorial, so I finally got around to it. So I hope you guys enjoyed and this actually helped you out. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Now, on a more personal note, I just wanted to say that I have been very busy lately. I've actually been working very hard on a robotics team. We placed 4th in an event where we had to automatically pathfind through obstacles, and we placed 10th in an event where we had to pick up obstacles with a robot arm. I've also been participating in several science-related clubs and programming-related activities. I made a video game. I've made the game Snake in less than 2 hours for a small competition, and I actually made a small platformer in less than a week for another competition. But it's all just for fun, because programming can be fun. But now I'm actually onto the college world, so I'm trying to apply to colleges, and yes, so I will definitely let you guys know where I end up going to college, because I know you all want to know. Anyway, I'm just rambling on. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for watching, and please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.